just to recap just a little bit, we're not going to go all the way back, but who remembers where we left off on Wednesday? Or Sunday, sorry. Today's Wednesday. Who remembers where we left off on Sunday?
They came back home, had money in their
That's right. That's right. And they figured out they had money in their sacks, just what they went for. And then when they came back, and they were concerned, but then some time was in between because they ran out of food, number one, and it was such a long journey to get home. And then they ran out of food, and then they were about to go back, and Jacob told his sons, number one, it was a battle with Jacob not wanting Benjamin to go back with them the second time. He really didn't want him to go. And Reuben put up a proposition that, hey, you can kill my two sons if I don't bring you back. And then later, Judah also says, you know, you can take my life if I don't bring them back. And meanwhile, Simeon is still in Egypt, locked up. Joseph has him locked up. For how long, it doesn't really say, but it seems like quite a while, especially with the weeks of the travel and the weeks of them traveling back, plus the time of them running out of food. So it seems like there's some time. But Jacob finally gives in, and he allows Benjamin to go with them. And so all the brothers go, and Joseph sees them coming, and he notices that Benjamin is with them. He tells his house steward to go ahead and let them in the house, that he wants to see them. They get nervous because the last thing they know is like what Randall just brought up, is they had their own money still in the bags of grain the last trip, and he's afraid that maybe he's already accused them of being spies, and now he might be accused of theft of the land, and this could be bad for him. He's like, wait a minute, why are they wanting to see us in the house? Yes, sir.
That recap just brought something to mind. Reuben said, if I'll take Benjamin, if I don't bring him back, you can kill my two sons. Is he thinking basically two sons for two sons? Jacob, he's responsible for Joseph
Possibly.
being dead in his mind.
Possibly,
And
that
then
could
responsible
be.
for Benjamin being dead in his mind. So two sons for an eye for an eye, basically.
That could be
I never thought of it
something.
until you just
Yep.
said that, and it just.
Yep.
It
He did offer, and it is funny that he didn't offer up himself.
Right.
You know, he offered up his two sons. Now, if he offered up himself, I know that I would rather give myself up before I would two of my children, because if I gave up two of my children like that, that would hurt me worse the rest of my life than it would me being gone. So he, in that way, he is giving up two, but it could be because of Joseph and then Benjamin. I never thought about it like that, but good point. Interesting. Never know what's going through their heads at the time, but Judah spoke up and said, you know, I'll you can take my life. Regardless, he let Jacob let Benjamin go with the brothers, and whenever they came to Egypt, Joseph noticed them, got them in the house, and they're nervous because they don't know if they're in trouble or not. Jacob, since they did have the money go home with them and the grain, Jacob made them take double the money back and all kinds of gifts, honey and almonds and everything fruitful of the land to give to this leader in Egypt, which they don't know is Joseph yet. So there was, so he brings them all in, and he's talking to them, and then we see that Reuben is like, see, I told you, you know, we're in trouble over selling Joseph. He has a big feast for the brothers, and at the end of this feast, he sends everybody away. That the Egyptian people sends everybody away where it's just Joseph and his brothers, and this is where he reveals to his brothers that he is his brother Joseph, and they couldn't believe it. And so, anyways, that was the second trip that they made into Egypt, and So how many times, I want to bring up a couple of things. How many times did Joseph have to excuse himself during these meetings that he had with his brothers in order to go and cry? To go weep? Anybody remember? 3. His brothers came 3 times, but Joseph goes away. How many times did Jesus cry in the Garden of Gethsemane before he was crucified? 3. Another correlation there. But it was a happy reunion. What is Joseph mad at his brothers? Whenever he meets them, does he kind of get on to them about, look what you did to me, now you're going to suffer, 20 years later, look what you did to me. You tried to kill me, you threw me in a pit, you sold me into slavery, you didn't care about me. Now you're going to suffer because the tables have turned, I'm the leader now, and you're not, and you need food from me, you need me. And how did Joseph treat his brothers? Treated them good, right? Gave them a feast, told them don't worry about it. This was all in God's plan. And the way he looked at it is the way, we talked about it Sunday. He always made the best out of every opportunity that he was put in. Every situation that he was put in, he made the best out of that opportunity, or best scenario out of that opportunity, and he trusted God. And he even told his brothers that God sent me here ahead of y'all. That way I could help you later with all of this food and all this stuff. He put me in this position. So Joseph knew all along. He made the best out of being sold into slavery. He made the best out of being thrown in prison while he was innocent. And he worked his way back out of prison and all the way up to the top leader under Pharaoh, because God was with him, and he knew that. Let's look at a few some similarities real quick between Joseph and Jesus. There is a lot of similarities between Adam and Jesus. There's a lot of similarities between King David and Jesus. There's a lot of similarities with a lot of people, but Joseph has a lot of similarities. Both were despised. Both went into Egypt. Both returned from Egypt. Both were arrested and they were innocent. Falsely accused. Resisted temptation and sin. Not to say Joseph was sinless, but in the case of Potiphar's wife, he was tempted there and he did not sin. Both were separated from their fathers. Both had great power and authority. Both were sold for silver, right? Both showed great love. I would throw in there forgiveness, especially for those that did him wrong. Both helped preserve life. I just finished talking about Joseph was sent ahead of his brothers to help preserve the family and help preserve life. Both were reunited with their brethren. Both showed compassion. Both showed pardon. And God was with them both. Joseph made claims about who he was, and people hated him. Basically, he was saying, I'm the favorite, and people are going to bow down to me, and he was hated. Jesus made claims about who he was, and people hated him. He suffered because other people hated him. Loved and offered forgiveness to his brothers. Jesus loved and offered forgiveness to everyone. Joseph offered a great place to live in Egypt. We're offered a great place to live in heaven. Joseph took care of physical needs. Jesus takes care of spiritual needs. Joseph suffered evil that God meant for good, and Jesus suffered evil that God meant for good. One of the things I found interesting too is Joseph was 30 years old when he became a ruler and was in power. In Jewish tradition, and we'll look at a few of these, in Jewish tradition, the age 30 was also often associated with maturity and responsibility. Now, I know that we'll see kings that are real young, and I know that we'll see 12-year-olds or 14-year-olds and things like that, but 30 is one of those magic numbers, let's call them special numbers in the scriptures, especially for rulers or priests and things like that. We'll look at a few of those in just a minute, but Joseph was 30 years old when he became ruler after he got out of jail. If you do the math, Jesus was also 30 when he started his ministry. In Jewish tradition, the age 30 was often associated with maturity and responsibility. It was considered the age at which priests, scribes, and rabbis began their official service, signifying their readiness to take on the burdens of their roles. Additionally, the number 30 in the Bible can symbolize dedication to a task or a calling, further emphasizing its significance. Numbers chapter 4 and verse 3 and 1 Chronicles 23 verse 3, the priests officially entered service at the age of 30. Saul became king at the age of 30. David also became king at the age of 30. And Ezekiel was called by God at age 30, prophet of God at age 30. So, looking at Joseph, there's a lot of similarities in his life about forgiveness and about things like that, but also the age too. You know, Joseph was 30 years old when he became a ruler, and Jesus was 30 years old whenever he started his ministry. And it's almost like it was looked at as, okay, there's cultures today that even have a special number, right? The Spanish or the Mexican culture, I think it's 15 years old for the boys or 16 for the girls, where they'll have a huge quince party or whatever it's called, party when they turn a certain age. That's like moving into manhood or moving into womanhood or being looked at a little bit differently. We might say 18 years old. We might say 21 years old here in America. Theirs was 30, and it was almost like okay, that's the man. That's a age of respect. That's where they probably are now. All right, now we're going to start listening to them. And I just thought that was interesting about how many was 30 years old when they became rulers or things like that. So, does anybody have anything you want to bring up here?
Does that mean you'd have to be 30 years old for your kids to listen to you?
Maybe. So, anyways, we get after the second visit with the brothers, they were able to go back home and let Jacob know that their father lives, and Joseph wanted, hey, go home, get dad, get the family, get all the livestock, and come on to Egypt. And they come to Egypt, and they settle right outside of Egypt, in a land that Joseph, and actually Pharaoh is the one that allowed Joseph to lavish all of these gifts on the whole family. And because of Joseph's trustworthiness and what all he's done for Pharaoh, he let Joseph have say-so and bringing them and giving them all. Matter of fact, he even sent wagons and things like that for them to make the trip. And at first, Joseph didn't believe him. Joseph was like, "No, I don't believe it. But I see all of Pharaoh's wagons and all these things that you brought. It must be true." So he went ahead and took his family and they moved. And so he's told, and also Jacob has a dream, and God talks to him and says, Jacob, don't worry about it. Go ahead and move out there, because this is where I'm going to make you a great nation. Don't be scared. Go ahead and go. And he went, and then we'll start seeing the building of the tribes of Israel near Egypt, and then later we'll see how they become slaves in Egypt. So before we get on to the questions, does anybody have any comments or anything you want to ask or talk about before we move on to the questions? Okay. Page number 47. This is the matching. A special garment given to Joseph by his father Jacob was what?
Coat of many colors.
Coat of many colors. And the Egyptian who purchased Joseph as his slave? Potiphar. The man who informed Pharaoh of Joseph's ability to interpret dreams? The cupbearer. What Joseph's brothers threw him into after they stripped him of his coat? Yep, the pit. The prisoner who died after Joseph interpreted his dream? Baker. The means by which the future was foretold in the story of Joseph, these often required Joseph's ability to interpret them. Dreams. The country Joseph ended up in when his brothers sold him as a slave.
Egypt.
Yep. A natural disaster that hit Egypt and the surrounding area for 7 years, depriving everyone of food.
Famine.
Jacob's favorite wife and the mother of Joseph. Rachel. The brother that Joseph treated roughly in front of the other brothers. Simeon. The youngest of the 12 brothers. Benjamin. And the ruler of Egypt. Pharaoh. All right. Joseph was sold into what by his brothers? Slavery. They had originally intended to what him instead? Kill him. And who was it that stopped that and gave the idea about throwing him into a pit?
Reuben.
That was the oldest brother Reuben. There were 3 pairs of dreams in the story of Joseph. Who dreamed them?
Brothers, Jacob, and Pharaoh.
Wait, say it again.
The brothers, Jacob, and Pharaoh.
Joseph, Pharaoh, chief baker,
Say it again.
the butler, the chief baker, Pharaoh, and Joseph.
Correct. Yeah, we had Joseph was the first dreams, right? He dreamed about the stars and the moon, and also the grain bowing down. And then you had the cupbearer and the baker in jail, in prison. And then number 3, Pharaoh was the last dream, and he had the 2 dreams also with the cows and the grain. Number 3, while Joseph served as a prime minister of Egypt, there were 7 years of what? Followed by 7 years of what?
Prosperity and famine.
Say the first one again, I'm sorry?
Prosperity.
Prosperity and famine, right. Number 4, according to Genesis 42:21, what was Joseph doing while he was down in a pit?
Begging for his life.
That's right, begging for his life, in utter anguish, crying for mercy, begging for his life. According to Genesis 43:33, when Joseph prepared a banquet for his brothers, he had them seated, and I failed to mention this, he had them seated in order from oldest to youngest. So when they did that feast, I failed to mention that, he had them, keep in mind, they don't know who he is at the time. All they know is each other. And he had Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, all of them lined up in order. And they were amazed. Why were they amazed?
How do you do that?
Yeah, how did he do that? He doesn't know us, but he did know him. But, and not only that, it's not like, you got 11 brothers, 11 brothers here. They're all pretty close in age for the most part, other than Benjamin probably. They're all pretty much close in age. So You get an adult male, it's like, man, are you 35? Are you 45? It's hard to tell sometimes with mature adult men their ages. Now, if you're 12, 14, 16, you might be able to figure it out a little bit and guess. But this wasn't a guess. He knew exactly what he was doing. And they were probably stunned because he got it right, and and their ages were so close together. All right, number 6. On page 46, try to figure out how many years Jacob believed that his favorite son was dead. Did y'all figure that out?
20 years.
About 23 years of believing that he was, because they were already 2 years into the famine, right? So it's about 23 years. He was sold when he was about 17, and it was he was about 40 during this time here. So they already had 7 years of prosperity, and they were already 2 years into the famine. So about 22, 23 years. All right. Multiple choice. According to Genesis chapter 38, which of Joseph's brothers also faced sexual temptation like Joseph later did in Genesis 39? Who's that? Judah. Yep. It was Judah and his daughter-in-law, actually. What item did Potiphar's wife keep as Joseph fled from her?
His coat.
Yep. Some type of garment. Yep. B, his garment. How many years after he was freed did the cupbearer finally remember Joseph? Y'all remember that? He interpreted the dream. Mom's holding up 2. Yep. So he interprets the dream and he says, hey, by the way, when you get out of here, remember me. And whenever he got out, it immediately said he forgot about him until, I think it was Greg that mentioned, until he could get something out of it. Later on, Pharaoh is, hey, I've got a dream. Oh, yeah, hey, Mr. Pharaoh, I know somebody that can help you, and now he's trying to get in good with him, possibly. Number 4, how many years into the famine did Joseph's brothers show up in Egypt? 2. All right. Number 5, Joseph recognized his brothers, and yet when he saw them, he accused them of being spies. Why?
See the change.
See if they changed, right? He was testing them. He tested them in a few different ways, right? He accused them of being spies. And if you notice, if you read the chapter when they went back to talk to Jacob about it, their father, most everything they said was right, except for it never said that Joseph asked them about the youngest son and all this stuff, but they told him all of that. They said, "Oh, well, we have a father at home, and we have another brother at home, and here's what all happened, and our other brother died." So they lied about that. But when they were telling Jacob, well, why'd you tell him all that? Well, he asked us, so we told him. Well, he didn't really say that, but when they were in Egypt, so he was testing them, and he was like, okay, I can see where y'all might say that Joseph's dead because I'm Joseph, but all the rest of the stuff pans out. I knew there was a younger brother. I got my dad's at home. Okay, great, he's still alive, and here's all the brothers. But later on, he tests them with putting the money in the bags. What are they going to do with that? Are they going to keep it and not say anything? No, they're going to come back and they're going to tell them about it. Okay, great. The second trip, he puts the silver cup, his silver cup, in Benjamin's bag, and what are they going to do with that? And he also pretends that he's doesn't speak Hebrew, So he can kind of eavesdrop on their conversations to see what their real thoughts are, right? And so there's several ways that he's testing them. And you can tell by the scriptures that when he hears them talking, he's emotional and he has to run out of the room to go compose himself because he's crying and it's heartfelt because he knows that they're sorrowful for what they did. They're scared for their lives and things like that. So what all he tested them with, he felt pretty good about it. And then finally he was able to reveal himself that he was their brother Joseph. All right, turn to page 50 for discussion. The Lord was with Joseph when he was in Potiphar's house in Genesis 39:2, and then in prison in 39:21. But where was God when Joseph was in the pit in Genesis 37? Where do you think what God is when we find ourselves in the pit of despair? Where was God when Joseph was in the pit, begging for his life?
He was there.
He was there. God was with Joseph when he was in the pit. Turn with me to Hebrews 13. Hebrews chapter 13. Verse 5. And this goes with where do you think God is when we find ourselves in a pit of despair? Make sure that your character is free from the love of money, being content that what you have, for he himself has said, I will never desert you, nor will I ever forsake you. For that we may confidently say, the Lord is my helper, I may not be afraid. What will man do to me? God is with us, even when we feel like we're in the pit of despair. Even if we feel like we're the lowest of low, God's always there. There was a boy, I don't know if y'all remember this or not, I forget what town, I want to say it was Chicago, I'm not sure where it was, but there was this boy playing in the yard, and he was, 8 years old or something like that. He was playing out in his front yard, and a car came up, and he took this boy, the guy kidnapped the kid right out of his front yard. And the whole time the kid went, and I forget what song it was, but it was a contemporary Christian song. It was about God, and he just sang it over and over and over and over until the kidnapper was driving around, and he got so sick of hearing this kid sing this song about God, he let the kid out. It was like this kid just got snatched from his yard, and all he could think about was trusting in God. I mean, that's what, he was just about praising God the entire time. And they drove around for quite a while. God just let him free. Didn't kill him, but that's one of the things is the worst thing could happen to this kid, and he's singing praises to God. Look at Paul when he was in prison, in the innermost prison. He's singing hymns, and other people are looking at it like, what are you doing? There's something different about you. Why? He's trusting in God. And so God is with us, even when we're in the pit of despair. Number 2, when Joseph confronted his brothers after his cup had been found in Benjamin's sack of grain, he told them, do you not know that a man like me can practice divination? Do you think that he really had dabbed in the dark arts? If not, why would he say such a thing?
I don't think he did it, but I think a man such as him, if he's a true Egyptian, he would have.
Yeah. Right. So he was still playing the part of the
Playing the
Egyptian
part of a true
at the time.
Egyptian.
Right. Yeah. it could have been that was meant during that time, but if it was talking about things that the Egyptians did, then it would be him still playing the part. It very well could have been talking about God also, but I tend to think that he was still trying to play the part of what the Egyptians believed and did too. Did you have something? I'll take it right here. Number 3, Joseph said that his brothers meant evil against me when they sold him into slavery, but God meant it for good. Can you recount an example of God taking something evil or unpleasant in your life and turning it into something great? Explain. Anybody?
Well, you know, I was deep, real deep in crime and sin and everything, and maybe it was God's way of getting my attention. I mean, I wasn't like a lot of people, you know, when I caught the felony and being in jail, I didn't like it.
Right.
I didn't like going to the bathroom in front of 28 other people. I didn't like it. That wasn't for me. So, was God working in my life to, you know, change me, to, you know, His providence, I believe, was working. So, you know, that's the way I think, you know, it was God that was with me, even though I was doing this, to lead me somewhere else later.
Yeah. Did you feel it?
Made a Connie, you know, which
Yeah.
taught me the gospel.
Did you feel it at the time?
No. No,
Right.
I knew I wanted to change. I really wasn't thinking God. I just knew I didn't want to be a criminal and, you know, do all those things that I was doing. I knew I wanted change. I just didn't know what that looked like,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I think your story and also Paul's, Paul Gregory, you know, it's
Well, look at this.
sure it
I
opens
was
up a door.
changed. Became a Christian, and then me and Daryl were riding, and Daryl, you know, I told Angie, I said, I'll hook you up a perk. You know, just kidding. And she said, yeah, okay, because Mickey had already left her, she was dating, and it wasn't very good. And Daryl said, man, I got this guy at Lottie, he's got a really good heart, he's kind of like you, he's really, I think you need to meet him. And the first time I met Paul, he was heading towards table at Lottie, and I thought, man. And I introduced, after Connie approved of him, I introduced him to Angie,
Right.
you know, and then how that went.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the best guy we could ever imagine to be here. You know. He
Yeah.
came in Kenzie's dad, you know.
Yeah, and you take a story like yours and Paul's too, not only did it change your lives, but it also opened up the door for you to go do the prison ministry. And then with that, Greg's able to work at the prison, and I've been fortunate to go with you sometimes and just, you know, just kind of opens
The whole
up.
thing
But at
started-
the time that you were going through it, it didn't seem like a blessing. It didn't seem like God was with you, right?
The whole thing started, you know, when Roger died.
Right,
That's when I found out about Todd being in prison.
right.
You know, that's when we sent Daryl up there, because Debbie Shepherd knew Daryl. Daryl up there baptized Todd. And then Daryl, you know, taught me into the prison work. And just from there, it's,
Yeah.
you know.
So there'll be times, and we'll see in different ones' lives in the scriptures, like Joseph, great example, that God was with him, even though it wasn't a great situation at the time, and he might not see a light at the end of the tunnel right there, but later on he can look back and say, that's, God was with me. And you just got to have faith that, you know, you just keep doing the right things that you need to be doing, just like Joseph did, and make the best out of every situation that you possibly can, out of every circumstance that you're in. And God can change around a bad circumstance and situation, and taking something evil or unpleasant in your life and turning it into something great. I mean, that's just what God does. You
Well,
know?
here on the bottom, and I guess it's Genesis 45:5, said, "Now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life."
Right. Yep.
So,
Yep. But he didn't know it at the time that he was in the pit. And he didn't know it when he was sold into slavery. And then he really probably didn't understand why he was thrown in jail. But he kept on, like I said, kept on having a good attitude, kept on having faith in God, and
trust, I think.
Yeah. and then
Trust in God.
then later, after he becomes a ruler, now he's got a little bit better mindset. It's like, this is why I'm here. God sent me here ahead of time so I could take care of my family and bring my family here. So I went through all these bad things, what I thought was bad at the time, to, this is something great now. So there's things in our lives that, God can take something very unpleasant or evil in your life and turn it into something good. We don't never need to lose sight of that. Number 4, Joseph responded well in the face of his trials. But suppose that he hadn't done that. Would God still have been able to save Jacob's family from starvation during the 7-year famine?
Yes,
If so, how?
he could do anything, he could give him manna.
That's right. Yes, sir.
Read Esther, book of Esther,
Right.
verse 4, or chapter 4. It says, verse 12, it related Esther's words to Mordecai, and Mordecai told him to reply to Esther, "Do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this." God always wins.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at Jesus's life. Look at the apostles around him. They still didn't grasp the whole thing either, even when he was being crucified. Here we have Jesus who was taken into custody, innocent, beaten, tortured, crucified. And it said, the apostles kind of scattered. They kind of went away, right? Until he resurrected. And I mean, look at the life of Paul. I mean, he took something where Paul thought he was doing right as Saul, where he thought he was doing right by persecuting the Christians. When Jesus appeared to him, he changed his life around, and he was the biggest spokesperson for Jesus, and turned his life completely around, and for the rest of his life. And if it wasn't for Paul, look how many, we already talked about it in one of our first classes, look how many letters and books we have in the Bible. If we didn't have those, we wouldn't know how to conduct and operate as a church, and how to be as Christians and things like that.
I think that's why God made him the apostle to the Gentiles, so to speak, because he was the other guy, the apostle common, but he was like the man's people, the man's people, whatever, what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, he was one of them, right? I mean, he was down, yeah.
To show people that nothing's impossible.
Right.
Help
That's right.
crucify Christians to preaching.
Yeah. The other thing I want to bring up too about this question is, it's asking, the writer is asking, would God have been able to do this? Well, we of course know that he can, because he can do anything. But also, God knows the past, present, future. We're the ones that live in time, not God. He knows the whole plan. He knows, this was going to happen. Let's pretend it didn't happen. God was going to find another, it was going to happen regardless, because why? Because he promised it, right? He promised that it would be a great nation. He promised that the seed would go through him, and if if his family starved, how would that happen? Then that would make God a liar. It's not going to happen. So, so yeah, that's the main thing that I put down was God knows past, present, future, and God's plan always prevails. And there's nothing we can do to change that if that's in God's will. So, does anybody else have anything on lesson number 4 before we start getting into lesson 5? It's about time to stop, a couple of minutes early, but I don't want to start lesson 5 and just get through one sentence or paragraph here. Anybody else have anything you want to add before we get into Egyptian bondage and all that kind of stuff in lesson 5? Nothing. All right. Thank you all for your attention tonight. I'll go ahead and close this just a little bit early. Mr. Greg, you want this or?
Yes, please.
Okay. I won't turn that off this time.
Thank you.
There you go.
Tonight I want to talk about faith. How there's, for me, we're going to talk about there's two kinds of faith. A lot of people just think, you know, I got faith, you know, my family's like that. They're Baptist, they're Methodist, they're Presbyterian, they're Assembly of God, they're everything. They have faith. Today I want to talk about faith that saves. There's a lot of misconceptions in the world today about the true nature of saving faith. Faith is the basic element of a person being saved. But just what does faith involve? What saving faith involves? First of all, the source of faith is the Word of God. Romans 10 and verse 17. So faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the Word of Christ. The simply hearing the Word of God, however, does not mean that a person has saving faith. For good news came to us just as to them, but the message they heard did not benefit them because they were not united by faith with those who listened. Hebrews 4 and verse 2. If you will, turn with me to James 1. James 1, I'm going to be reading from verse 22 of James 1. James 1, verse 22. But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away and once forgets what he was like. But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and preserves, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing. So we can see here that having faith isn't enough. You have to be a doer. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Two examples prove this point. Turn with me to John 12. John 12. John 12, I'll be reading from verse 42. John 12, verse 42. Nevertheless, many even of the authorities believed in him, but for fear of the Pharisees, they did not confess it, so that they would not be put out of the synagogue. For they love the glory that comes from man more than the glory that comes from God. For with the heart one believes and is justified, and with the mouth one confesses and is saved. Romans 10 and verse 10. Just a few more verses to consider. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I tell you? Luke 6 and verse 46. Turn with me to Romans 16. Romans 16. Romans 16, I'll be reading from verse 25. Romans 16, verse 25. Now to him who is able to strengthen you according to my gospel and the preaching of Jesus Christ, according to the revelation of the mystery that was kept secret for long ages, but has now been disclosed and through the prophetic writings has been made known to all nations, according to the command of the eternal God, to bring about the obedience of faith. So we can see that saving faith is obedient faith. So what is the other kind of faith? It's the faith that does not obey. So we're going to be people of the book. We have to obey the book, word by word. We can't leave anything out. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. And being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him. Hebrews 5 and verse 8. So today, if you don't have the faith that saves, true obedient faith in Jesus the Christ, we would ask you to please come forward. Or if you're a member here and you need the prayers of the saints, please come forward as we stand.